when we talk about this issue, there's actually a couple pieces, and we've raised some very significant concerns with this first piece that Ryan was talking about, the interpretive rule, for a reason, because they're tying together. And they adopted this piece of the rule, this interpretive rule, on purpose. But what it did is it made an agreement with NRCS between a voluntary incentive-based program that helps producers every day do conservation measures through voluntary measures. They basically took the technical guide, and there's about 125 technical practices in this guide that have standards and specifications, and they identified which ones that are exempt under, and there's one particular piece of the Clean Water Act. It's called Section 404. I think it's in the next slide. But within the 404 section, there are specific pieces that are exempt. There's about 9 items in Section 404 in the Clean Water Act that are exempt to those provisions of the Act. So it's supposed to be exempt. And our big concern, and when we submitted the comments on that proposed rule, you do not have the authority to supersede federal law. The law says normal farming and ranching practices are exempt. The law says upland soil and water conservation practices are exempt. It doesn't say to a NRCS technical standard or anything else. It says they're exempt from that permitting activity, which is very, very relevant when we start dealing with other sections of the Clean Water Act, like 402 when we're applying pesticides. And now, just like the pictures that Ryan was showing you, okay, of this list of 125 practices, they picked out 56 that they decided in their good nature that these were still going to be exempt. And as the first thing, when I'm reading through that, I'm looking through the list. What's probably our most common conservation practice that we have in Kansas, there's miles and miles and miles of them in Jackson County, a terrace, a practice code 600. It's not on the exempt list. Why? Well, it goes back to that definition he was showing you. Define bed, bank, and channel. No, it was designed that way. It's a man-made conveyance. It's very clear. So we adamantly opposed, you don't have the authority to say that these are no longer exempt when a federal act, you can't, just because you say so, you can't just be saying, nope, it's no longer exempt. This is now a water of the U.S. Well, it ties back in to when you've expanded that definition. And I just cite this. There's a handful of issues with the 404, but it's actually, it exempts them under the 404, the 1311, and 1342. The Clean Water Act is a massive, massive bill. And we'll just hit a couple highlights. And like Ryan said, we're going to be at about 30,000 feet. And we're just trying to pick out the great big issues that are our concerns from the department. And in one accord with our sister agency of Health and Environment, where we're standing on the same side of the fence on all these issues. Okay, and that's kind of the overview of how it all ties together. Lack the authority. Okay, here's a couple other issues. You know, and this is from a personal perspective, because in the Division of Conservation, we have state-funded, Senator Pyle, and others, we have the state water plan, and we run a lot of cost-share programs, voluntary incentive-based programs, through that USDA Service Center. And it's just philosophically wrong to start tying regulatory activities through a voluntary incentive-based service agency. You can't bring those things there, or we will no longer have that opportunity. And you're tying regulatory implementation to a voluntary entity when you brought NRCS into this fold. And that was the gradient terrace example that I just spoke about. Okay, this is this exact same list that Ryan just went over. In the bottom line, these are the definitions, the core definitions. And the real differences is how these things are interpreted. Historically, anything that's in red, and I think basically from about here down, his 5 to 7, it's been in the Act. But the difference is it was the burden of proof. See, historically, anything in that 5, 6, or 7 category, EPA had to come on your ground and prove beyond the benefit of the doubt that this was a water of the U.S. instead of now, when they flipped these rules and adopted these as waters of the U.S., now it's your burden or my burden of proof to prove that I don't have a water of the U.S. if it meets this definition. That's huge. You know, with the technical resources and the costs, and it's so difficult with these definitions, we won't prove it. So it's an undefinable. We can't reach it. The major big issues, and we kind of tie together, Tom kind of gets into some weeds here and is going to explain some more details on tributaries. But here's our major areas of concern. The default tributaries, and that's what I was just talking about. Defaulting, instead of EPA having to come on and prove that this was a water of the U.S., they've said since the language has always been there, it's never been defined, I've always had that authority. Well, no, you had to come and prove that it was actually a water of the U.S., which we've been through years and years and years. In Tom's shop has done use sustainability analysis. We've already went through all of this exercise years ago and identified which streams that are technically waters of the U.S. and which ones are waters of the state of Kansas. Default adjacent waters, all of our riparian areas and everything else, anything that's close or may have an inter or a subgrade connection will be a water. The terms significant nexus, we believe they've taken that out of context. They pulled it out of one particular court case and then they applied it where it best suited them. And it's very significantly out of context. Ditches, just like Ryan talked about. The shallow subsurface or other connections, ephemeral streams. That's like the ephemeral gully that he showed you in the field, ephemeral streams. That's every little conveyance that we can really imagine. And then the underlying principle that they're trying to say, well, it doesn't increase our jurisdictional authority. And we contend you're lying. And these are just a couple pieces that I actually just pulled out of the register, and you can just read that. And it's, the rule would, for the first time, include a regulatory definition for tributary. This will eliminate the need to make a case-specific significant nexus determination for tributaries for their adjacent waters because it's already been determined that as a category, these waters have a significant nexus and therefore are waters of the U.S. because I said so. So it goes back, that burden of proof, well, we couldn't really do it, so we just want to change the definition so we don't have to do it. And that's a direct pull out of the Federal Register. Current classified waters, and Tom is the best technical water guru that we have in the state of Kansas, and I've known Tom for 30 years. And when we started arguing and talking about these issues, when this came out several months ago, he did his best effort to guesstimate how many miles do we feel this expanded their authority. And right now, our regulated stream miles in this ambient stream water quality monitoring networks that Tom's group administers about 30,000 miles. Perennial reservoirs, acre reservoirs. All other waters are waters of the state. That's the way it is today. Under this proposed national data set, and we were running, Tom when he was running this initially, we were ballparking 135,000, or Tom was, saying that's our best educated guess. Well, here, 3 weeks ago, they actually had to release a map to let us know really what they were talking about. You can jump on, I actually think I have Tom's maps. This is the current stream network that's regulated under the Clean Water Act today. That was the 135,000 miles. These are the ones that would be included under this proposed rule that we thought, our best educated guess. And this one's hard to see because it's the wrong color. This one goes to 174,000 miles is the map that they actually, so it even went further up those tributaries, further reaches, and this still doesn't include your terraces. If those are delineated as streams, then we have millions. But it goes back to seeing, it goes, what difference does that make? How does it relate? Well, if I have that ephemeral and that's considered a stream that it impacts on my 402, you may have to deal with NPDES permitting to spray pesticides, of any restricted use pesticides and those types of things. It all matters. It all ties together. Whether it's land application of my effluent from a feedlot going on to a particular field of normal agricultural practice. Well, if it had a terrace that was considered a water of the U.S., then I'm putting it in a stream, it's a no-go. That's why we get pretty emotional, or I do, about the impacts. And I wish I had an answer of how can you stay calm at a time like this? So with that, I'll introduce Tom Stiles, and he'll go into a few more details, and we'll sure be here to address questions.